another episode of Fresh Off the Boat. Yes, and hello, definitely, and welcoming Toya Singh, one of the students I worked with in 2014 or something, before you went to 12. Wow, that's you have a better memory than I do. So this is when you were in Manila, and we hadn't really met, and then you went to Sarah Lawrence College, and life turned quite a bit for you since then. I also noticed on your LinkedIn profile that you did you took opportunities to intern in several places and also did a summer program in broadcasting. So all these things we'd like to know because our students will be very interested. First things first, what was Sarah Lawrence like? Your first impressions about the place and matching it with what you thought you expected.
Sarah Lawrence is a magical place, which is such a cliche thing to say about your college, I know, but it really is that word for me. I think going there, especially as a woman, redefined for me so many different questions I didn't even realize I had. What it was like to even be a woman. What, small things. What I love that college did is it made me question the small parts of being a woman, but also the larger questions. And it was just I use that word magical because it was the kind of place that taught me to question, to be curious. It undid a lot of the learning that I'd done in India, but in a very good way. And it taught me to just be a very, very strong woman. It taught me to be curious. And it's fascinating because I've come back to India. I've now been back in India for 2 years because I spent a significant amount of time in New York, and I had the choice of staying on there because of my visa. And I made the choice to come back here just to try it out and see what being in India would be like. And it's fascinating because the industry I work in now is almost the polar opposite in many ways. And we'll go into that in a little bit of time. But it's in many ways the polar opposite of a lot of what Sarah Lawrence taught me. And so it's been really fascinating to see how deep that learning is. How long will it stay? Those questions come up in you very quickly when it's like, am I staying true to the values that I thought I wanted to hold on to for the rest of my life? But yeah, to get back to your question, a truly magical place. And I mean that as no exaggeration whatsoever. I was very, very lucky to have gone there because it was a wonderland. If you're a curious person, it was a wonderland because it was a space where there are 10 kids in a class. My brother right now is in UC Berkeley, and that's a college that I remember growing up, I thought was, an incredible college. And I had a lot of friends go there. And my point is just that when I talk to him about his classes and we talk about class sizes, and he'll tell me the fact that, he's a good kid. I mean, studies-wise, grades-wise, he's getting good grades. But when he'll tell me things like you can, give your class, whatever the thing is that marks your attendance, to someone else, and not go in for class, or you can just straight up not, they are actually structured so that you can not go for class for weeks and just watch them online. All those things blow my mind because I hear about that and I'm like, my God, my college made me love learning. We were there at 8 a.m., teeth freshly brushed. We'd come in and we'd just read a book for the last 4 hours. We loved the shit we were doing. And that was the only way to go forth in that college was you had to really love your education. And it taught you how to do that. It's not like I walked in there and loved it from the beginning, but you had the opportunity to choose whatever class you wanted. I studied jazz, singing, and I studied economics, and I studied Middle Eastern politics. My point is it was truly like, hey, you're curious about something, go study it. And in that sense, it was a wonderland. And that's what I mean when I say I was
fantastic. Yeah, so that's definitely sums up the word magical. And small liberal arts colleges, unfortunately,
yes,
where the world is today, more and more colleges are offering classes online, including smaller colleges. I hope this time shall pass and we go back to that that methodology of tutoring. And so tell me a little bit about tutoring at Sarah Lawrence. So you have a tutor and you work in pairs with a few students, or it's just one-on-one? And what is the outcome?
It's one-on-one. So there are two different systems. There's the fact that you will, from the first day that you enter that college, have a don, and you will be the donee. And so that don is kind of like your parental figure who checks in with you for the rest of your 4 years. That, for some people, worked really beautifully. For some people, it didn't work at all. Me, for instance, me and my don didn't have the closest relationship. Lovely, me and him had a cordial relationship, but very much not the kind of person I could sit with and talk to for hours, as caring as he was. But the other thing that you have is that every class you take, so you only take 3 classes in a semester. And each of those classes, you have to sit with if it's a seminar and not a lecture, you have to sit and meet your professor once every 2 weeks, and you sit for an hour and you discuss this side project. Because in every class, along with the essays that you're doing every few weeks, you're also doing one long conference project over the course of the entire semester. And that project will be specialized. So for instance, I was studying Middle Eastern politics, and my conference paper was on how Saudi Arabian women used social media as a form of expression. So that's what I mean. It's kind of a minuscule part of that much larger subject. But what you get to do is you sit one-on-one with that professor, and they tell you what books to read. You kind of go down these long, pathways, but at the same time, you also build a relationship with them, which is why when it comes to going to grad school, etc., SLC teachers can write you such excellent recommendations because they really get to know you because of that process. But yeah.
Great. What about pre-professional tracks, though? There's always that thing about, do liberal arts colleges, particularly the ones which are really tiny, like Sarah Lawrence in size, do they prepare students for pre-professional tracks? And that's the question most parents keep asking. Students love the idea of going to a small school, but when it comes to translating that to finally making a call. In your case, your brother also went to a large school, despite the fact that your dad and mom obviously liked the idea of Sarah Lawrence for you. So each one to its own. But what do you think? Is that a grouse most students have, that small colleges don't prepare students for careers?
I think that there's something that we need to be very careful about when we're entering this discussion, because my parents were not happy. I would even say till today, I think SLC definitely did not answer for them the question of will their kids go, will their kid have a job after this. That was not, SLC was a place that made me curious about the education that I have. SLC is a place that did a lot of character building. But job preparation, I would very much say that SLC is not the place that you go for to be like, hey, I want that, amazing. And that's not to say that every third kid doesn't. Like, lots of kids I know have graduated on to do excellent jobs, but they're earning a lot. So that's not to answer that, but it is to say that a lot of parents I know, I was class president, and on the day that I graduated and I was giving that graduation speech, in my own speech, I joked because me and my co-class president, neither of us were leaving with jobs in our hands. That's not the kind of place that and that's not to say, obviously, everyone you graduate, you take some months to you end up with a job. Then move on, you will not have a job. Then you will, that life and the nature of employment is such that things figure themselves out. But answer your question, which is that, to those parents, SLC does have the option to prepare you for pre-professional tracks. I have a number of friends one of my best friends studied pre-law at SLC and is now at Harvard at the law school studying law. And there are a number of such examples I can give. I have another friend who's getting a master's to become a professor. And he also took his his preparation classes at SLC. So SLC does do all of that, but it's a place that you go to for education first and to be curious first. That is the way I would look at that. It's an experience, and I use that word magical, but it is in no way a preparation for a lot of the big. And that's the thing is, when I see, I don't want to make this entire interview a comparison between and Sarah Lawrence,
large or small.
Yeah, particularly because Prithvi is only in freshman year. He's only in the first year. They are very, very good. They're so focused on, at freshman year, they're so focused on how will he get out, what will he, but when I sit down and ask him what you're taking away from his classes, there's a different, so I really think that it comes down to you asking yourself, what are your priorities when you say.
Well said. So in general, if you look at your career and you walked out as class president, knowing fully well that you still need time to explore and then choose a calling, tell me a little bit about broadcast journalism. And being an anchor is super cool from the outside, but being there for an 8 a.m. show is definitely going to be a challenge which many people don't think about. So tell me, how was that journey, and how did you commit to a career in broadcast journalism?
Okay, so in college I did jazz, I sang, and before that in Vasant Valley and even in Manila, because I was in Manila for the last 2 years of my school, I was singing there, and I realized that I love, the thing I love, or the thing that makes me feel most alive, is being on stage and is communicating and feeling that, like, I don't want to say again magic, but that energy from communicating. And I had that thing. And so when I graduated from college, I spent a good 6 months not doing anything. So I'd moved into Brooklyn, and I was trying to figure out what I should do. And I started then working at National Public Radio in New York. And I was interning with a show called Ask Me Another, which is a game show that they have. And it was one of those, it was a very, very lovely job that taught me about the rigor with which Americans work. They are so professional. And what I mean is, I was working on a quiz game show, and for one question, we would literally sit and do a day's research. I remember, and I think this is a funny example, in Friends, there's a character called Ross. And Ross is a paleontologist. And this was once a question in one of the quizzes. And the audience member said he's a zoologist. No, not a zoologist, a geologist. We spent a day researching whether or not a paleontologist is technically also a geologist or not. And we contacted Columbia, we contacted the National Science Institute. That's my entire point. Like, that was the beauty of learning and what working there really taught me. But I will say that while working there, and then also after that, I worked at Discovery Channel. So that's the thing is, I was like, all right, this is, media is where I'm interested in. What I'm interested in doing. But while I was doing that, I was also seeing the talent, quote unquote, the central figures in each of these shows. And I was seeing the fact that in both NPR and in Discovery, I saw that I felt like I could be taken a lot more seriously and given an opportunity a lot easier if I tried it a different way. And I was trying to figure out what that different way could be, because I wanted to try being the face, and I wanted to see what that process could look like. When I say the face, I mean the in front of camera, energy or person. And so I was at Discovery Channel, and that was almost a step in the other direction, because when I was at Discovery Channel, I was working on Cash Cab, which is a quiz show. And I'd also interned at Shark Tank, along the way. So a lot of different media platforms. But when I was at this place, when I was at Discovery, I really realized we were writing, and I just felt like I'm in the middle of nowhere. And that's kind of where my America experience kind of grew interesting, because while I was working there, I really realized I started missing a lot of things about India. The community, the sense of feeling like you belong, some very, very pivotal things. And the lovely thing about working at an NPR or a Discovery is I've had what I would call the prime American experience, working at companies that are incredibly intellectually alive. But it was only after working there that I could be like, all right, this is really cool, but I want to see if this can be brought to India and if more can be done. So I came back in 2018. 18.
Yeah, not 8.
Yeah, when I came back, there was typical, like I come, and the one thing I want to tell, if there are any kids who are graduating or about to graduate or in that process, it took me I have had so many long chunks of unemployment. And I think those chunks are so important. I think people, especially in the Indian mindset, are so afraid of being unemployed. But I think that if you're able to, it's a privilege. If you're able to, because it's a privilege that, someone is paying for me. Someone is paying for the food that's entering not now, but like earlier, there was definitely that was something that was taken care of. If that's a privilege you have, be careful, but try to make sure that you're using it. Be intellectually curious and explore as much as you can. And I only say that because when I came back to India, again, there were 6 months where I was sitting around, and I have to tell you that I came to India and there were so many people who were like, just join any media company, just work anywhere, be a reporter, because people don't know how to approach industries that they don't know anything about, and so a lot of the parental advice, not from my parents, but everyone was, go just join this company. And the problem in our media industry, as we know it today, is that media in India and even in the US, actually, there's a sharp divide, right? There's right-wing channels and 1 or 2 left-wing channels. And so I came back, and there was this thing of, the channel I wanted to work at, or the channels I wanted to work at, not being able to employ or hire at this time because of the climate that we're in. And so that was the thing, is I came back and I really applied to different places, sat around, felt hopeless. And that's what I mean, is it's all part of the process. And then I started anchoring, and first I started training. It was a long 3, 4, 5 month process of just training at the company. And while I was training, I was doing this other thing called desk work. We never talk about the fact that if you're an anchor, max you're anchoring 3, 4 hours. What is that anchor doing for the rest of their day? There's always something they're doing apart from that. And in my case, it was editorial work, and I hated it. And I hated it because it was something that was literally cut paste. It was work that wasn't very cerebral, but was also known to not be cerebral. Like, everyone knew that it was kind of the grunt work. But the experience of anchoring itself was for the first, I'd say for the first year and a half, it was pretty revelatory. It was pretty cool. It's the only job that I've known that you can't switch off while doing, because you have to, as Arjun was saying, you have to go to sleep at 8 p.m. every night, and then you have to wake up at 3:30 in the morning, and then I take a cab and I go to, or I was going to Noida, and I was sitting with like in the morning 3:30, you're sitting with security guard, the driver, and you are just going in the andhera, in the raat, and you're just landing up, and there's like a quick hour of makeup, and then you study. I would study for 3 hours, and then I would go on air at 7 a.m. And the reason I'd study was because sometimes those coverage notes, so the people, the note that decides what's going to go on the next morning is written the night before. So it needs updates based on what's happened. You need to know the news. You need to know the perspectives. You need to know arguments. So it's a lot of really, really intense work. And for 2 years, I didn't have a life. I have just quit a few days ago. And when I say a few days ago, I mean, it's been, I think, 10 days. But very, very happy with this decision. Because
Congratulations. Yeah, it's fantastic. In fact, you are the second person on our show, I can call it now, because we're launching a podcast, who's quit and started a venture of their own, and also related to media. So I'll introduce you to this is Malika Kapoor, who I had interviewed, and she lives in Calcutta. So yeah, it'll be fascinating to see how both of you could collaborate in some ways. Great. So I've understood, like, I think connecting the dots, the energy you got from performance in jazz. In fact, I attended one of your jazz concerts in Sarah Lawrence. Yeah, it's fantastic. Great memories. And also then seeing the different opportunities and internships that you sort of figured things out. Yes, it is a privilege to be able to do that. At this time, students who are graduating from high school or graduating from college, sadly not getting their graduation ceremonies the way they typically do, what is the message you'd give them? How do you deal with uncertainty? I know it's not something that you face, this kind of uncertainty, but in general, what advice would you give people who are suffering?
The only advice I would give is that the inevitable is going to happen, and the inevitable is that you are going to have many days where you don't know what's going to come ahead. I just want to ask you to not settle. And when I say I want you to not settle, it's that to the degree that you can, try not to do jobs that are comfortable and so you're taking them. Try not to do jobs that are, that it's like, okay, you finally got a job and so you took it. One of the things I'm happiest for is in 2018, so 2017 end, I'd gotten done with NPR, I'd gotten done with Discovery, and there was a job at Newsweek that I was interviewing for. And while I was interviewing for that, I went in for the first interview, and it was, I'm realizing now that saying the names is probably not great, especially when I'm going to say something that isn't the most complimentary. But I remember entering that, Newsweek room, and just a lot of the ways that a number of these companies are today run is it's digital. It's how many hits can you get on your page, And so I remember them talking to me about the articles they need me to write and saying, you need to get this many hits to do this, da 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 da. And I was sitting there and I was just like, and it was freezing cold outside, right? Because New York, you have snow up till your chin. And I was just sitting there and I was like, my God, is this really what I want to do? And then my parents were so scared, and I was so scared because it had been 3 months since I'd, been unemployed after Discovery, that my parents were just like, stay, wait, see, because then I got a second round, then I got a third round. They had 4 or 5 rounds. So as I kept getting rounds, they were like, please stay, please stay. And for me, something clicked, and I was like, I just don't want to do this. And I know I don't want to do this. And I'm so, even though it took so many months after that coming back to Delhi to explore, I'm so happy I did that, because you can't compare being an anchor in one of the country's biggest channels to writing articles somewhere that wouldn't have. And that was the thing, is it's not even about the name. And that's, I think, what it's really important to realize is in your years now, you're going to get some jobs that sound great and some jobs that don't sound great. The unifying factor is the job something that wakes you up in the morning and has you excited? And for 2 years or a year and a half at least, anchoring got me up and it got me excited and it had me on my toes. Trust me, when you're 24, 25 and you're doing a job that you're waking up 3:30 in the morning for and sacrificing everything else for, because you don't have a social life, obviously, if you're sleeping at 7. You don't have anything else. But it's worth it. And so my point is just that. My point is, do not settle. choose something that is intellectually curious, keep pushing yourself. You are entering the hardest times. Trust me, as someone who has been unemployed for very, very large portions, I know just how the word is depressing. Like, let's not shy away from that word. It can get very scary, it can get very depressing. You just need to, it's unfortunate, but all I can say is you really need to believe. And when you see those little signs of magic, because small things will connect in small ways, you need to be able to
Right. I always keep telling students that there are guardian angels out there. There's
yeah.
something does work out.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there would be mentors along the way who've been there for you without really expecting anything. There are good things happening in the world. So you just have to wait for that signal. But being ready for those opportunities is another thing. Going forward, I had a few personal sort of quick takeaway questions, kind of rapid fire questions for you. One would be, what do you think, in three adjectives, how would you describe your strengths?
Do you want me to describe my strengths, or do you want to tell me what my strengths
Or,
are?
yeah, three words. Yes, that's it.
Of what the strengths are.
Right.
This is I should have known this was coming. The three
Right.
strengths, easily, I would say one is persistence. I would say one is curiosity. And I would say the third is optimism. Very much.
Well said.
Too much
Well said.
optimism sometimes, but very much there.
Okay, so now this portion, which is the last 5 minutes of our segment, is more about going back in time and thinking about college admissions and life as a high schooler, reconnecting online and sort of doing essays, etc. together. What was the experience for you like? Happy to plug in whatever good or not so great things you have to say
No, it was
about our
more.
work.
I remember. Well, me and you did it online entirely, which I think
Right,
is
right.
unique. I would suggest try to meet your counselor if you can, obviously, and I think you would also suggest that. That said, I think it was such an interesting experience. There was one essay I remember we wrote. I think it was about performing on stage. There was another on Anderson Cooper. It was one of the coolest experiences, just because. I remember I was doing IB, which is in its own way very rigorous. But this was so stimulating to come home to and have to write and to do. And I remember being so frustrated while while it was stimulating me, because that's just part of that process. So yeah, my single take, I mean, it was a lot of fun. Would I do it again? Probably not. But yeah, it was definitely very stimulating. But yeah.
Great. So, and in terms of advice for high school kids, how would you sort of tell them to look for colleges or even work
What I was
towards
trying to say.
applications?
I would really suggest when it comes to colleges, and this is the advice. So my brother goes to Berkeley because I told him to go to Berkeley. It's a funny thing to say. Like, I'm like, many will say that, but no, seriously, like he will also say that himself. And he had a few options, and the reason I gave you that little thing is because he was looking at colleges like UCLA, and that's the thing is, I think when Indians, when we approach the idea of going to colleges, we always approach it as A, name brand, and B, this concept of like job kaise aayega, right? And my brother was looking at a few colleges, Berkeley being one of them, but there were others like UCLA and a few others that would have probably been better for his job prospects. But for me, Berkeley, of all his options, would have left him the most intellectually curious. I give you his example because when I look at myself and Sarah Lawrence, it was the same thing. You want to find something. I'm not saying enter this as you don't need to find a job in the end of the day, because of course that is, let's be realistic, that is the goal. But if you're a high schooler, I would really suggest going into that, look at one of my favorite ways to do this is look at the college's alumni. See, and when I say look, I don't mean look at their name. Don't see how famous they are. Nah, I want you to look into their lives. Sarah Lawrence produced Vera Wang, who's the clothing designer, and she was a science student who one day started designing clothes. My college is full of experiences and people like that, people that I like to call Renaissance men and women who've specialized in doing a number of things. Rahm Emanuel, who's the Chicago mayor, or was the Chicago mayor, was also a economics, and he was also a ballerina. That's my entire point. Like, a number of these people that have done everything. A Renaissance person is the hardest thing to be, but it's also what I think our future is going to contain more and more of. People who are doing
with the gig economy and with people trying new careers, and you're a case in point where you're sort of reinventing yourself to launch your own YouTube channel. How far is that headed? Like, do you see that as the next thing that you want to do, or it's just one of those side gigs?
No, it's very much. It's not a. It's not even a. So I'll tell you, the way I approached it was when I was working, when I was anchoring. I just saw that the news that we were doing was just not, and I don't mean my channel. I mean news in general was not being presented in a manner in which so much of India could consume it. So much of India has moved to their phones, and yet news media has not done that shift in the same way. So you do have a few websites that have started out and are doing a very brave job, but that large scale transition hasn't happened. And I just feel like there's so much exciting shit. There's so much scope in that space that needs to be explored. It was as simple as when I was turning around and asking people, in the last few months when CAA, NRC, when Kashmir was happening, and I was turning around and asking people, very few people knew what was actually going on. There was an apathy when it came to Indians knowing about what was going on in India. And that's not something we should be proud about at all. One of the things I think that makes America so special is that Americans take pride and know and involve themselves in what's going on in their country. And I think Indians need to do that in a much, privileged Indians in particular need to do that in a much, much bigger way. But it's not fair to ask them to do that if the media we're creating isn't exciting enough and isn't scintillating enough. Who am I to ask for that? So that was
So
my
the first what do you call it, episode that you launched on YouTube was very millennial, very Gen Z, and it had that energy, but also very intellectual in bits and parts. So it was a interesting. It was almost like watching interesting professors speak about different concepts and merging things together in a cool way. So crash course on so and so philosophy and current affairs. So where do you see? Will you have a team eventually, or you already have a team?
So I do already have
how
I
will it
have
grow?
people who are working with me. But for me, it's not. So that's one episode. But the way I actually structured this was I wanted to spend the next 3 months. This is actually the first month, but I want to spend the next 3 months playing around with what media can look like. I have released that it's Thought Jungle. It's one episode. But before I carried on with making more episodes, even there, I wanted to play around with other formats also. So it was very important to me that I not jump into doing something just because it's, I've given it feet. I wanted to play around with something that was more long form, something that was much more political. I want to try that out, then I want to try something else. The reason I want to try out all these languages is because I think it's so important to try and only then go forward. I don't want to be making, especially because I'm only going to be 25 once. And I'm only going to have the privilege of sitting at home, my parents not worrying, me having the finances to go about doing this. These privileges aren't going to come together too many more times in my life. And so I really want to go about this in a way that tries and is curious and is experimental first. So that episode is very much, as you're talking about, it's philosophy and it's fun, I think. But what I want to look towards creating now is I'm looking towards creating something much more newsy because I want to see what that looks like, what that feels like, and then go back to create, because that's what I'm like. The world is my canvas, and that is a space I won't have for too long. So I might as well use it.
So Shekhar Guptas and Shoma Chaudharys of the world will have to look out for you. That's great. So yeah, this has been fantastic spending this half an hour with you, Toya, and looking forward to meeting you in person again sometime in Gurgaon, Delhi, whenever. Currently, there's a whole story about the borders being locked. So I have friends and family who want to visit and they can't.
But to tell you, my cousin just went to Gurgaon today and it took him all of 20 minutes. So
okay, great. And no extra passes or anything. So good. The world is turning for the better. And so all the best for the future. We will invite you for kind of a webinar panel soon. And like I said, there are students who are doing similar things or even want to be those Renaissance men and women. So I think it'll be just fantastic to put people together. So thank you again. And let's connect in the future.
Thank you, Arjun. Goodbye. See you.
Thank you. Goodbye.